What's up, y'all? One Piece One Life here, and guys, real quick, I want you to think of who is the most valuable person to you. Not who do you love the most, not who is your best friend, but who is genuinely the most valuable person in your life. Who's the person that you rely on for things? Who is the person that, you turn to when you need help with something because you just know that they got your back? I mean, even sports teams have MVPs. They're just the people who generally, or at least for that game, had the largest effect to such a point where without them, that game would have been different. Probably would have resulted in a loss. And when you're talking about anime, the MVP of a certain situation or a certain fight, it's gonna be the same thing. So that's why in today's video, I wanna go through all the One Piece arcs and say who I think is the MVP of each arc. But before we begin, guys, please, y'all know what to do. Like the video, subscribe to the page for more One Piece content just like this, and share it around with all your friends who love the series. Let's get it going. Now, I already mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate again, I'm defining MVP, or most valuable player, as the person in this arc who, if you remove them from this arc, the arc completely changes and likely would have been a loss for the Straw Hat side. The person who overall contributed just the most, or at least in the most important or impactful way. And there's nowhere else to start from but the beginning, so we're gonna start with the first arc of One Piece, and that's Romance Dawn. In Romance Dawn, for those of you who don't know how I do it, I always count both Luffy's flashback and Shellstown together as Romance Dawn. And for Romance Dawn, I mean, we don't have a lot of options, but for me, it's gonna be a coin toss between Luffy and Zoro. With the only reason it's being a coin toss is because in both arcs, it centers on both of their different characters, and that's kind of the start of their dynamic. So in fact, one could even say that, the two of them together are the MVPs. Though, I mean, I guess if you want to say that Zoro is more the MVP because he's the one who actually defeated Morgan, but then again, Luffy's also the MVP for freeing Zoro, meeting Zoro, and just, getting the whole story started. But I will admit that Romance Dawn, it doesn't have that much to work with. Orange Town, on the other hand, does. Well, not a lot to work with in terms of characters, because we still knew probably less than 15 named characters at this point, but we definitely knew who the MVP was, or as I did, because from the moment I saw her to the moment that the arc ended, something told me that the MVP was going to be Nami. And was I right? Nami's the MVP of Orange Town because she's the one who actually knows what's happening in terms of her interactions with Buggy, trying to trick him and everything like that, trying to steal the Grand Line map. Luffy and Zoro were just bumbling along and just happened to be there, but Nami's the one who actually came up with the plans. And yes, while it was Luffy and Zoro who ended up doing the majority of the fighting, we can't act like Nami's contributions in the Orange Town arc aren't important. I mean, it was literally her idea to tie up Buggy's body parts so that he couldn't fight back with his Chop Chop fruit. Without that, who knows if Luffy would have been smart enough to figure that out. Now in Syrup Village, I'm gonna have to give it to Luffy. One thing I forgot to mention at the start, by the way, just as a side note, I'm gonna try as much as possible to not give everything to Luffy because he's the main character. Of course, he's gonna be most people's MVPs, but in certain arcs where there's just no other situations, sometimes it'll default to Luffy. Sometimes it will literally be Luffy, but in as much as possible, I'll try and make it somebody that's not the main character. But anyways, back to what we were saying. Syrup Village is Luffy because of everything he did before, during, and after the Black Cat Pirates invasion. I mean, before you have him meeting Usopp and actually bonding with him, and then telling Usopp, don't worry, we're gonna help you fight. The main part of his MVP-ness, if you can call it that, is of course during the actual battle on the day of, because let's not forget that he decimated basically the entirety of the Black Cat Pirates alone. I mean, it was in his hypnotism-induced state when Django hypnotized him, but he literally ripped the mast off of their ship, or maybe it was the figurehead. He ripped something off of their ship and then just started swinging it around, and I think he killed some people. Okay, killed is a bit extreme, but you get my point. And then of course, finishing off Kuro alone. Now when we get to the Baratier, my pick for the MVP might be something that y'all aren't expecting, because I'm gonna go ahead and say that it's Gin. Now for those of you who don't remember who Gin is the dude who came to the Baratier and was like, oh, I feel real sick, I need food, please treat me, and bonded with Sanji. That he was the mechanism through which Sanji showed the kind of good-hearted person he is, where even if Gin didn't have any money, he would still help him out. Then things took a turn for the worse when he was revealed to be part of Krieg's crew. Now, I don't know how many people remember the Baratie that well. I know I didn't, which is why I had to cross-reference. But remember that when Sanji and Gin were fighting and Gin got the upper hand, he refused to kill Sanji and literally was begging with Krieg, yo, let's spare the cooks. And after Krieg was like, nah, you gonna die with them instead, and shot off the, poison smoke bomb or whatever, Gin literally gave his mask to Luffy because Luffy didn't have one. He saved his enemy at his own, risk of his own life. I ain't gonna lie, the story might have ended just then and there if Gin didn't do that. So Gin, I salute you. You're good in my books. Now, when we get to Arlong Park, the MVP has to be Luffy. I mean, this is the moment that a lot of people fell in love with One Piece. Between, the walk to Arlong Park where Luffy was like, let's go, and the others just unfailingly followed him, breaking into Arlong's home and immediately punching him, and then the final climactic battle with Arlong himself and the, symbolic destruction of Arlong Park. This showed the kind of person that Luffy is, and also foreshadowed the, liberator that he would become. So yeah, for me, for Arlong Park, has to be Luffy. Some people might say Nami for, it being her story and it's kind of her, she's the emotional standpoint, but I think that Luffy, he's irreplaceable in this arc. Now, for the last arc in, the East Blue Saga, which is Locktown, I ain't gonna lie, guys, I really didn't find a person. I don't remember a lot from Locktown, I can't lie, but from what I do remember, nothing crazy happened except the appearance of Dragon, which I guess is why I'm gonna have to give MVP to Dragon. I mean, fair enough, he showed up and he saved his son, even though we didn't know it was his son at first. He stopped Smoker, who at that time was top 2 in the story. Because remember, this is before we knew that there were ways to counter Logias. This was back when Logias were invincible. So, Dragon actually did something, which is not going to be the norm going forward. Now, Reverse Mountain is another weird one because I'm like, everything about Reverse Mountain was just a joke to me. I'm not really entirely sure who's supposed to be the true, what was the conflict of Reverse Mountain? And I don't count Vivi and the other guy with the baseball bat, because they weren't villains. But I don't know, I'd say maybe just for showing his dedication of trying to breach the huge ass continent in front of him, we'll give the MVP to Laboon. Okay guys, so I know that the last few arcs have been a bit shaky, but Whiskey Peak, it's undeniably Rowanoa Zoro. Let's not forget what Zoro did on Whiskey Peak. He fought an entire town of bounty hunters alone, manhandled some of the strongest people there, which isn't saying a lot now because obviously we know relatively how weak they were. But at the time, and their sheer numbers, yeah, Whiskey Peak was a good time to be a Zoro fan. Not that I was one, but it was a good time to be one. Now in Little Garden, I'm gonna actually give it to Usopp. Firstly, you have the whole seeding of the Elbaf, just story and Usopp's connection with the Giants, which, we would see again in Enies Lobby, again in Dressrosa, and then even now on Egghead, now that the Giants are here and we're going to Elbaf next, there's just such a huge payoff for Usopp's character that all started from the Little Garden arc. He was the most enraged, obviously, when he saw that the gifts that he had tried to give to the Giants exploded. It actually made him viscerally mad, which, just furthered the point of him and his connection to the Giants. And most people don't even remember that Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine were on Little Garden, but they were. And Usopp actually was gaining the courage to try and fight them. He was doing his best. I mean, Usopp's just a guy with a slingshot at the end of the day. He was doing his best against 2 powerful Delphi users. He also freed Luffy from Miss Golden Week's colors trap by burning off his shirt, and he's the one who helped Luffy to figure out what Mr. 3's weakness is in order for Luffy to beat him. So yeah, I'll have to say Usopp on Little Garden. Now Drum Kingdom, I am gonna have to give it to Chopper, where you see his entire story arc of not being wanted by anybody until he finds Hero Look and then actually training under him, and just the perseverance that Chopper has to continue on. and to continue learning medicine, something that he's dedicated his life to, I think is great. And I mean, Drum Kingdom just isn't the same without Chopper. Yes, it is a Straw Hat centered arc, so the Straw Hat of that arc should be the one who gets the focus. But what can I say? Chopper just has, it's just a really good time for Chopper. I mean, you have like the whole culmination of the whole Sakura petal tree thing, and then Chopper being a reindeer taking Luffy and the others away on the sleigh like it's supposed to be Santa. Now when we get to Alabasta, I think I have another tie. And the tie this time is between Vivi and Sanji. Vivi's entire character story arc of persistence and just keep being there for her people, to me, was amazing storytelling by Oda. Especially at a point where female characters in other anime and manga were being made to look like jokes. Vivi was such a boss. Vivi is the definition of standing on business, because she said, I'm going to infiltrate this organization and I will work tirelessly until they are brought down. And that's what she did. Vivi went right into an active war and started screaming and calling for people to stop fighting. And then afterwards, even after all that happened, she wanted to leave with her friends, but she knew she had a duty at home and had to stay. That's dedication. But there is also an argument to be made that it's Sanji, because his whole Mr. Prince thing was excellent, both on Little Garden, but more so its use on Alabasta. Drawing out Crocodile with bait so that he could go and save his friends, which he did easily by taking out a huge banana gator in one kick, definitely was amazing to see. Because let's not lie, without Sanji, all the Straw Hats, Vivi, Smoker as well, would have died at that point. Next up is Jaya, and this one's easy, it's Luffy. The whole bar scene with Bellamy's crew where he's realizing what it took for Shanks to do for him all those years ago, and showing that character growth. And then of course, flipping the switch when it comes to somebody touching his friends, because when Bellamy goes knocking on Cricket's door to steal his gold, Luffy comes in and knocks on Bellamy's head. But in Skypiea, I'm gonna have to go Sanji, because Alabasta started the trend of, in long form arcs, Sanji doing the most clutch thing possible. Things that while everyone else is fighting, he's doing technical stuff to ensure either their escape or their victory. And this is what he did in Skypiea, when he literally went and janked up the entirety of Enel's Arc Maxim, and then got zapped by a disgusting amount of lightning, and still was standing tall with the I need a light. One of the best Sanji moments, period. I ain't gonna lie. I Need a Light is Sanji's Nothing Happened. Long Ring, Long Land, it's, you know, a joke arc, but we still gotta give it an MVP. And again, MVP is gonna be Luffy, but with a twist, because specifically, it's Afro Luffy. And the entire reason is because he did an entire serious fight with that ridiculous afro on his head. But now get into the good stuff. We have Water 7. And I'm not like a lot of people where they combine Water 7 and Enies Lobby. I'm putting them as two separate entries. But for Water 7, it definitely has to be Usopp. Water 7 is potentially the most emotionally charged One Piece has ever been, period. And a lot of that is due to Usopp. Yeah, the fact that the Mary's falling apart, so Usopp, because he's the one who received the Mary as a gift from Kaya, is trying to fix it. Yeah, the fact that with the Straw Hats trying to leave the Mary behind, it's symbolic of Usopp thinking that they're gonna leave him behind too, because he views himself as weak and useless, which in itself is seemingly proved when he's beaten by the Frankie family and the 100 million belly is taken off of him, which all culminates in the amazing battle between him and Luffy, where in that battle, obviously he was gonna lose because it's Luffy against Usopp, but let's not act like Usopp didn't have Luffy on the ropes. Usopp knows Luffy in and out and used every trick in the bag he could to do as much damage as he could. Then all that for him to break down, and we realize that he knew deep down that the Mary was broken, but it's just dedication. He can't let it go. That to then on the scene train, scrap. That to then the sea train, and you have the introduction of Sogeking, which the anime did phenomenal with the Sogeking song. Soge, Soge, Soge. Sogeking. And there are arguments to be made that Usopp is the MVP for Enies Lobby too. But I ain't gonna lie to you guys, the MVP for Enies Lobby in my mind has to be Sanji. Not only did he literally save Usopp's life and have the cold bar of everyone gotta do what they can do, and you rely on your friends when you can't do something. But then he does another clutch thing, as he tends to do in these arcs, when he goes and finds the control switch to close the gate of justice. Because without that, these guys weren't leaving. They can beat as many people as they want to. They wouldn't have left. Eventually, somebody would have overwhelmed them. Now we head to the Florian Triangle, and we have the Thriller Bark arc, where I think that here, the MVP has to be Zoro. And I mean, what else can you really say besides nothing happened? Though Brook is also arguable because, you know, it's Brook's storyline. At least the majority of the arc is supposed to be Brook's storyline. Now for the Sabaody Archipelago, for this MVP, you have to actually think retrospectively and realize that the MVP was Kuma. I mean, at the time we didn't know it because Kuma just looked like a big scary warlord doing his big scary warlord job of, at that time we thought, killing the Straw Hats. But turns out they were saved because they were just sent to other places. But even then we were wondering, okay, what's his objective? He ended up saving the Straw Hats. Like, what's going on? He then ended up guarding their ship over the time skip too. So it was another point of what's going on. But now that we have the Kuma flashback and we know that he is literally one of the top 3 best characters in One Piece period, we know that it's literally because he put all his faith in Luffy. He said, I'm about to become a cyborg. I won't have my humanity anymore. So I need to see you live. And if you go into the new world right now, you will die. So I'm gonna make sure you do not die. So we all have to clap and say a big thank you to Anime Jesus. Amazon Lily is easy. It's Luffy. It's obviously Luffy as well. Like, let's just move on. Impel Down is an interesting one because here it's Bon Clay. I mean, from meeting back up with Luffy on whatever level they were on, to saving Luffy's life from like all those wolves and everything in the freezing hell after Luffy passed out, being the catalyst, or at least part of the reason why Luffy was brought to, you know, New Kama Land so that he could get healed by Ivankov. And then of course him staying back and saying, I'm going to hold off Magellan so that you can go, Luffy, go save your brother. I mean, there's a reason that Luffy cries when he says, Bonchan, I'll never forget you. It's because Luffy knows you were just as much as an MVP as somebody could possibly be in this situation. Luffy knew what we know in this moment. Bonchan is different. Now Marineford is interesting because there is a lot of characters participating in this battle. But I can't lie, I think that the MVP of Marineford was Whitebeard. I mean, it's Whitebeard. From the way that he pulled up and the first thing he did was create 2 tsunamis that without Aokiji would have instantly decimated the entire battlefield, to then in his old age, old and sick with a, I believe, terminal disease, pulling up onto the battlefield and still knocking heads, one-shotting giants, fighting all 3 admirals at different points in time, telling Akainu, who is in most people's top 5 right now, hey, magma brat, cut it out, and blowing out the magma like a birthday candle. To then, of course, his amazing The One Piece is Real speech before his amazing death, where he never had anything on his back and died standing tall, just like Benkei. We have to give respects to Whitebeard, man. Now, I'm not gonna go through post-war or Return to Sabaody because I think that they're moot points. And in Fishman Island, I'm gonna do a bit of an exception to my rule because I'm gonna say it's really all the Straw Hats. I mean, they each had their moment to shine, right? Because they're showing us what they can do after the time skip, how they've improved, how they've grown. So each person has their shine. But mostly, of course, it's gonna be Jinbei. I mean, like the other people who've had their arcs in the past, this is at least meant to be Jinbei's arc. He's the one who came up with the whole plan at Gyeongkor Plaza, and then literally breaking the cycle of hatred between humans and fishmen, at least that fishmen had towards humans, by sharing blood with Luffy and being like, we have to stop this racism shit. Like, Luffy, you are a good person, and I want to follow you. Just, you know, not right now. I still have a big mother that I owe money to. Now for Punk Hazard, I'm definitely gonna say that the MVP was Law. I mean, first of all, the way that Law pulled up in that doorway when we were introduced to his post-time skip fit Whoo! I love how the alliance between him and Luffy was formed, where Luffy was like, hey, you gonna betray me? I was like, nah. Luffy was like, I bet. But then I love seeing how Law's mind works. He's always coming up with these plans and these tactics, and then also seeing how that then interacts with the Straw Hats, and especially Luffy when his plans go off the rails, but he can still, formulate a plan around it. And then culminating, of course, in his fight against Virgo with Smoker, which I think was probably the best fight of Punk Hazard. I mean, actually, easily the best fight of Punk Hazard. Punk Hazard didn't have any other good fights in my opinion. But then we get to Dressrosa. And guys, Dressrosa was a long arc that introduced a lot of characters. But out of all those characters, we have to give the MVP to God Usopp. I mean, guys, Usopp literally gained the epithet of God by being the liberator of a multitude of toy slaves. I mean, Usopp was such an MVP. Doflamingo himself, the arc boss, gave Usopp a higher reward price than Luffy, the literal captain of the crew and the literal MC of the show. I think that it just has to be Usopp. Now, it can be argued to be Sabo, because Sabo did some pretty impressive things during the arc too, starting with him showing us that he's still alive, destroying the entirety of the Crowded Coliseum and eating Ace's flame fruit, and then holding off Fujitora, which, let's be reminded that Fujitora is an admiral. That's not an easy feat, but I think overall it still has to go to Usopp. Now for Zou, I'm giving it to a collection of people again, so I'm gonna kind of break the rules and just give it to the mink race as a whole, which I know is like 90% of the people who are on Zou, but still. And it's solely for Raizo is safe. Raizo is safe is one of the most cathartic moments in all of One Piece. Let's not forget what the Minks had to go through for this. They endured Jack torturing them and their leaders especially for days upon days. And then when Jack said, you know what, I've had enough of this, bombed them with a gas weapon. Jack said, all of this pain goes away if you tell me where Raizo is. And they swore on their mother's lies they didn't know where Raizo was. Raizo was safe in that whale tree the whole time. They had to chain Raizo up because Raizo wanted to bust out so that the torture would stop. Nah, props to the Minks for real. In Whole Cake Island, this should be obvious, but it's definitely Sanji. I mean, I know people I know people love Luffy versus Katakuri, but overall in the entirety of the arc, we have to give it to Sanji, guys. I mean, come on. Oda's character writing for Sanji in this arc was beyond fantabulous. Sanji literally feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders because he has to manage keeping Zeph alive, keeping his family alive, and keeping the Straw Hats alive. Such to the extent where he had to front and, attack Luffy, his captain, who he really was attacking because, let's not lie, let's not act like them attacks didn't hurt. But it was all because I don't want you to be here, because if you're here, you're going to die, and I don't want you to die. But of course Luffy saw through that, and when the chips were down, Sanji said what he really wanted and stood on business about it too. And let's also not forget that Sanji was the first Straw Hat to defeat an Emperor of the Sea. Of course when he's talking about when he made the wedding cake. I mean, just think about this. Sanji made a cake so good that the world's largest and most picky food fanatic passed out from pure pleasure and joy. Now for Wano, I am gonna separate Wano from Onigashima, and you'll see why soon. But for Wano Country, I'm giving it to a toss-up between Zoro and Sanji for different reasons. Now for Zoro, Wano was supposed to be his post-time skip arc the way that Whole Cake was for Sanji, and it kind of didn't go like that, but especially during acts 1 and 2, it kind of was. I mean, they sauced Zoro up, especially in the anime. I mean, who remembers Killer versus Zoro? That fight was legendary. And of course, all the emphasis on the swords and Zoro trying to, control Enma when he gets it. As for Sanji, it's coming off the tail end of Whole Cake, reintegrating himself into the crew, and then trying to, come to terms with his identity. He has the raid suit, smashes the raid suit because he doesn't need it, even though at that point, the exoskeleton of his, Germa enhancements is starting to kick in. And while both of those storylines between Zoro trying to control Enma and Sanji, controlling his, Germa urges, did persist and were mainly seen in Onigashima, they started in base Wano. But more so, the reason why I'm separating them is because the MVP of Onigashima has to be my boy, Marco the Pineapple Phoenix. I mean, let's not forget what Marco did in this fight. He held off the Ice Oni for long enough that Chopper could create a stable, fix to it. He got Zoro to the roof by literally just flying him there. And perhaps most impressively, held off King and Queen, Yonko first and second commander, at the same time. And because I don't think people understand how hard that is, that's like if Lucky Roo were to right now be able to hold off Zoro and Sanji at the same time. Well, I guess it would be more Ben Beckman since he's the first mate like Marco was, but you get my point. It's not easy. Of course, for Onigashima, people are gonna have that argument for Luffy because of Gear 5. But I think Gear 5 was honestly like more hype. Don't come for me, guys. I know Wano's not, happening without Luffy, but the entire story's not happening without Luffy, so I'm not counting that argument. But on Egghead, what Luffy has shown us is different. I mean, able to steamroll Rob Lucci, who was at one point in his life the hardest fight for a long time, able to quite easily match an Admiral, and honestly should have beaten that Admiral if we're not lying, because when he got that grab off, there's no reason to throw him. Let's call a spade a spade. But then most recently, taking on both Gorosei Saturn and Admiral Kizaru at the same time, he literally elevated what Marco did, and much easier. There's an argument to be made for Kuma, at least what's left of Kuma's body when he flew in, but I think that Luffy's honestly, at least at the current moment, taking it, which may change soon, but hey, One Piece is back this week, so I guess we'll see what happens. So that's the end of the video, guys, but before we go, please, y'all know what to do. Like the video, subscribe to the channel for more One Piece content just like this, and share it around with all your friends who love One Piece. Remember, I'm trying to make a community, but I need your help to do it. Well, that's going to be all from me. I'll catch you on the next one. And always remember, One Piece, one life. I already know people are going to be like, oh, well, why didn't you say Luffy here, Luffy here? Guys, Luffy is the MVP of the entire story. It wouldn't be fun if the whole list was just Luffy, now would it?